Mars, a frozen wasteland where few dare to venture, with currently only 2 spacecraft residing on its surface, both of which had less than ideal outcomes. But as 1967 comes to a close, a collaborative effort from the European Space Agency and the British Interplanetary Society aims to change that with their incredibly advanced robotic Beagle lander. Hello everyone and welcome back to For All Kerbalkind, but before moving on to the Beagle lander and the Mars Express, which we launched a couple of episodes ago, well, there has been a rather large amount of development from the other 2 nations in this series. Kicking things off on the 29th of June, the Soviets send their first spacecraft to orbit Saturn. But this week is going to be incredibly busy, as on the 4th of July, Freedom Day, the Astral Foundation respond in kind. But not wanting to be one-upped, the Soviets send yet another one on the 8th of July. A very busy transfer window indeed. We're going to skip ahead to August 6th, where the crew of Trinity 7 returned to Earth. This capsule landed off the south coast of Australia, which, as you might know, is within the area that I'm launching from, and well within my rights to request that the Astral Foundation pay me a hefty fine in order to clean up after themselves. They left a lot of litter on the southern coast, and we don't want to have to clean that up ourselves. So with this in mind, I am going to be charging N9 0.4 funds for the cleanup effort. And if I could have that post-haste, that would be wonderful. And if he doesn't send that, well, go and spam his comment section with "Where's my money?" He'll know who sent you. Anyway, enough about what the other 2 have been up to, because we're finally getting to our first launch of this episode, which is going to be GeoFish 1. And if GeoFish doesn't give it away, we are going to be sending a fish to geostationary orbit. Fish being my network of communication satellites. Now, I am doing this for a contract, because I have a contract to achieve geostationary orbit, and it does pay me an awful lot of money, and if you watched the last episode, you may know that money is a bit of a problem at the moment, but also because communications are a problem. I do have permission from Beardy to use his communication network, although for some reason it's still not working, and I have gone and turned CanCom on for those. It might just be that the antenna that I'm currently using aren't quite powerful enough on my probes in low Earth orbit, or maybe I have messed something up in the install. It could be either of them, honestly, who knows. Anyway, GeoFish has been launched from Kourou, because having that 5-degree inclination is going to make it incredibly easy to put something into geostationary orbit. And this is the first time that I have ever launched an Ariane with no boosters. I was able to get the Ariane 1 to take this craft up to geostationary orbit without the need of any side boosters, which is really nice because I think it looks a little bit more like a traditional Ariane 1 this way. Obviously, further iterations of the Ariane did use boosters, and we will be seeing a lot of Arianes that use boosters, and we will be seeing bigger Arianes coming hopefully at some point soon. And to be honest, I think that in real life Ariane 5 is more likely going to be my Ariane 10. There's going to be a lot of different iterations on the Ariane that I'm going to go over the course of this series as they develop and we build bigger versions of them, maybe upgrade the upper stages to be larger. We'll see how that goes. I've got a few ideas in my head, but anyway, we have made our way out to geostationary altitude. I have plotted a maneuver in order to put us into the correct orbit, and I am hovering over the fuel tank here because this is using Hydrolox, and I currently do not have any MLI, multi-layer insulation, so my fuel is boiling off incredibly quickly. I was a little bit concerned because I do need that RZ-20 to fire up again in order to put me in the orbit that I so desire, but thankfully there is enough fuel left when I arrive at my node to complete this orbit. One way that I sort of mitigated boil off in this case is that I pointed the rear of the spacecraft to the sun. This is a really cool feature that is actually within RSSRO. If my tank is not being hit by the sun, then it won't warm up as much. So if I block out as much sunlight as I can, then we're going to mitigate boil off losses. And yes, this meant that I had enough fuel to perform the burn. A burn that put me directly above Australia, which is going to be absolutely fantastic for any time that I want to launch something from Woomera. Communication blackouts are a thing of the past when launching from my original site. Next up, just 5 days later, Peter Decouplers has been flown all the way over to the Soviet Union for a collaborative mission. Brother of the famous Jeffrey Decouplers, yes, that guy who flew an English Electric Lightning to space, he has been chosen to fill a seat on the Soyuz 15 mission. A mission that will see Peter, Estrella, and Rus visit Salyut 4, the Soviet space station currently in low Earth orbit. Beardy approached me and asked me if I wanted to send up a crew member on this flight, and of course I said yes. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the game rules that we've got for this kind of situation. Because if we don't have specific rules in place, then this could be very game breaking for me, and already I feel like this mission has given me a massive boost. The big hard rule that we've got is that missions like this, collaborative missions that I'm going to be sending crew on, are not allowed to complete contracts that we pick up. However, they are allowed to complete crewed milestones. And because of this, when Beardy gave me the splice craft that contained Estrella, Peter, and Rus, well, I completed a milestone. I completed the milestone for having 3 crew in orbit, and that gave me a very nice 400,000 funds, which for an agency has been struggling somewhat with their money situation, was absolutely brilliant. This won't be the only milestone that I complete over the course of this mission as well. I already have the 7-day crew duration milestone, which I thankfully got when Beardy allowed me to fly on a previous mission with Jeffrey. However, the stay at Salyut means that these cosmonauts are going to be in orbit for a few months. Anyway, having been given control of the spacecraft, I had to raise its orbit from about 250 kilometers to 315. The Soyuz only has about 2.5 days worth of electric charge on it, and if I didn't do this, well, I wouldn't have rendezvoused with Salyut in time. It would have ran out of power before I would have had that opportunity. Having unlimited ignitions on the Soyuz, I knew that test light wouldn't be my bane today. However, my fat fingers were, and as I approached the station, I flew right past it because I hit increased time warp rather than decreased time warp. That 0.1 kilometer separation suddenly became about 3 kilometers before I was able to slow the Soyuz down and start pointing back at the target again so that I could actually dock with this thing. Time somewhat being of the essence now, considering I have used the vast majority of the electric charge on this Soyuz capsule already. I did, however, decide not to use the main engines on the Soyuz again for docking, and for one reason and one reason alone. I only have 82 meters per second of delta V remaining in the Soyuz. Yeah, that little maneuver to try and meet back up with Salyut was rather costly. However, before docking, I did have a look and see how much delta V I would need to get back home from this altitude, and it's about 60 meters per second. So as long as nothing goes drastically wrong, well, I won't have to ask Beardy to send up a replacement Soyuz to get these guys home. Honestly, if that were the case, I might not be privy to these rides anymore. Now being only 50 meters away from Salyut 4, the serious docking time begins, and I do have to give the Bearded Penguin some credit here. This spacecraft was incredibly easy to maneuver. I'm not using any sort of mods like docking port alignment indicator, and I'm not allowed to use docking autopilot, so I had to do this all by myself. Now, if you'd have asked me to do this 4 years ago when I started my channel, absolutely not. Docking is something that I always struggled with in KSP, but as I have played an awful lot more over the past 4 or 5 years, I don't even want to think about how many hours it's been, I have gotten somewhat better, and I can actually dock. Although I am still using Smart ASS to point the nose of this in the opposite direction of the docking port, which I have set as my target. Makes it a little bit easier to dock, and it also means I don't do the lazy method of pointing the targets at each other. In fact, I don't even think I can do that with Salyut, because I'm fairly sure that Salyut does not have any RCS on board. Although maybe I just didn't check to see if the station has any RCS on it. That's something that I might have to go and have a look at, because otherwise it would start spinning out of control, and that would be a problem. I have probably messed up there. Oh well, it works. And I was able to get the 3 crew on board, and now to leave them here for quite some time. Not even a month later, on the 16th of September, we have a very pivotal mission in any space agency's career. That being sending our first crew to orbit. Now, we already have crew in orbit currently. We have literally just left Peter Decouplers on Salyut 4. However, we did not send him there, and that is exactly what the Sparrow series of missions is going to attempt. The Commonwealth Space Commission has finally got a capsule that it wants to send to space. And we are going to be launching this on top of a Black Prince 2, a rocket that I have had for quite some time. Now, it's not the launch vehicle technology that I was lacking previously, it was actually the capsule technology, but I have unlocked basic capsules, I have bought all the parts I need, and I had the money to build Sparrow I at the end of the last episode. The capsule that we are going to be using is the Viking capsule. It is different from what N9 and Beardy have used, and I have it from the Knez mod, which is a very nice mod that adds a whole host of European Space Agency parts to the game. I have tried looking this capsule up and see if this was based on anything historical, and in my limited knowledge of how to type things into Google, well, I couldn't actually find anything. So if you know if this is based on, say, a real life concept, please let me know in the comments. I know some of the other parts that this mod includes are, like the MRC capsule, which I will be using as my multi-role capsule, which is, you know, what it stands for, later on down the line, and I imagine this is what I'll be using to send crew to the moon in the far distant future. But yeah, my searching returned nothing, so this is just a concept of a concept. We need to send one crew to space, and that's exactly what this capsule is going to achieve. And the crew member that we have today is going to be Mary Kerman. Now, I cannot remember for the life of me if Mary has ever flown a flight before, because the last time I really used Kerbals that weren't Jeffrey and Peter would have been in my first episode, which came out about 2 years ago, so yeah, I can't really remember that far back. But I felt that Mary was far more than capable of getting the Viking capsule up to space on top of the Black Prince 2. It is a very tried and tested design, and we are, of course, able to do that. But speaking of tried and tested, this is the main reason why I have gone for a launch from Woomera rather than Kourou. If I were to launch from Kourou, I would have to use one of my Ariane 1s. Considering I have only flown 3 of those at the moment, it's not exactly the most reliable of launch vehicles that I have, and I felt far safer putting Mary's life in the hands of the Black Prince. Now, I did have a launch escape system, so if everything were to go completely wrong, I could always escape from the rocket. However, I did want this mission to be a success. Last episode, we had quite a few failures. It would be nice to get through an entire episode with none. But a success is exactly what it has been, and Mary was more than capable of getting to orbit in the Viking capsule. And now I am just waiting to almost run out of electric charge before deciding to send her back safely home. Now, re-entry, of course, being one of the more dangerous parts of a mission. I'm sure everything will go according to plan, and it absolutely will. The amount of times that I simulated this mission was insane. I just wanted Mary to be safe, okay? Now, there's another thing that's new on this install that I've not shown in any video that I have done yet so far, and that is I have very kindly been given access to Mirage Dev's new re-entry mod. And the Viking capsule here isn't the best way to showcase this, because it's not very big and it doesn't really play too well with the mod, but this is something that is going to look absolutely fantastic in future videos when I've got, say, slightly larger craft, and it's going to make re-entry look bloody amazing. It's still in development and not publicly available yet, but I am very excited to see where this mod goes. Setting my perigee at 20 kilometers, I knew that Mary would make it back safe, and because she has, and the contract has been completed, I am rewarded with a massive intake of funds, now sitting at 650,000. But that's not it, because completing that first crewed orbit contract, well, that unlocked me some very lucrative future contracts, and the first one that I go and pick up is going to be First Rendezvous. Now, this is something that I can achieve with Sparrow already, so I don't need to really spend anything in order to complete this contract. With over $1 million in the bank now, though, I build my next launch pad, which is going to be for Ariane 5, or whatever I decide to call it when I get there. And finally, I decide to upgrade the astronaut complex so I can perform EVAs. And now it's off to the Mars Express to attempt our first landing. And when I say first landing, I do really mean first landing, unless you count on Earth. But if this is successful, I will have landed on Mars before I have landed on the moon. You may recall I have already attempted to land twice on the moon and neither of them worked. But now on the 19th of September 1967, Mars Express with the Beagle lander attached has made its way into Mars's sphere of influence. And I am going to cut this up ever so slightly because I want to contract farm. As soon as you get the flyby, well, the orbit contract opens up. And the orbit contract, at least for the first time that you attempt an orbit of a planet, doesn't require a new vessel to be launched. And over the course course of this mission, I want to try and complete first flyby, which has already been done, first orbit, which now that the Vexen engine on the back of this has fired up is looking to be very promising, and also atmospheric probe and first landing. Now I'll get to first landing in a bit because that is a little bit different. But with the Vexen stage now having finished its burn, the orbit parameters have been completed and we are in a highly elliptical Mars orbit of 200 kilometers by 4,500. Now if you're wondering why the Vexen looks like an AJ10, that's because I'm using the AJ10 model, but it is using the Vexen engine config, an engine that was used on the French Diamant, and currently really the only hypergolic engine that I can reliably use for something like this. With orbit achieved, it's back to the Space Center for the next two contracts, atmospheric probe and Mars landing. Now I waited to have an orbit for this because if that Vexen failed, well, it would have taken me a long time to get back to Mars, and with a reliability of only 90%, there was a good chance of that happening. I also needed to wait for the mission control building to be upgraded so that I had enough contract slots to actually pick up the Mars landing contract. Then a quick visit to research and development to pick up lunar orbiter capsules, lunar exploration era materials science, and 64 to 65 solid rocket engines, all progressing towards making Ariane 5. And with those picked up, it's back to Mars to attempt to land Beagle on the surface. Now I should really talk about the Beagle lander because this is a real world design, it actually flew, and it is landed on the surface of Mars in real life, but it was a failure. Now I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that we are going to be sending an advanced robotic lander, and the reason for this is I am using infernal robotics for this craft. This does also somewhat tie into the failure of the real Beagle 2 mission, and that is the landing was successful. However, two of the solar panels on Beagle did not deploy, and the way that this craft was designed, it blocked the antenna. So much as how N9 has had communication issues with his probes on the surface of Mars, well, the in real life Beagle suffered the same fate. It landed, but it couldn't talk back to Earth, and it was only in 2015 that we discovered that the Beagle had landed when it was picked up on some imagery from NASA's MRO, 12 years after it had touched down. It is a pretty cool design though, and I hope you like how I have tried to recreate it, and if you want to go see it in real life, they do have a replica of it at the Science Museum in London. I know, because I've been to see it. However, unfortunately, this was after I designed this craft. It would have been nice to have had that reference, but if I'm going to be particularly honest, I don't think there's much I would have changed about this design anyway. With all the parachutes now successfully deployed, I am pretty sure that this is going to be a successful Mars landing. At this point anyway, I have already completed the Mars atmospheric probe contract, yet another contract that doesn't require a new launch to complete. As soon as I went below 50 kilometers, that contract fired because I still have a connection to the Mars Express, which is currently sat in Mars orbit. Now Mars has a wickedly thin atmosphere, and despite having 8 parachutes on this lander, it still comes down a touch too hard, and unfortunately lands on one of its hinges, causing the hinge to break, and therefore meaning that this mission is a complete fail. No, it's not. Despite one of the hinges breaking, this is still going to be a successful Mars landing. We have done it, we have landed on the surface. But once again, this does kind of mirror what may have happened to Beagle 2 in real life. There are a lot of theories, and no one quite exactly knows why it failed, but one of them was that it came down too hard and basically broke apart the mechanism that would cause the 2 solar panels that were supposed to unfold to not do that. Thankfully though, in my case, because the antenna that is on this craft is located within the avionics unit that has survived, I still have communication back to the Mars Express. And despite losing 1 solar panel, I am able to gain a bit more electric charge with this. However, this was designed to last permanently, or at least until solar panel degradation kicked in. Because of that missing one, well, it's not going to be able to do that. It will at most last about 5 days on the surface. A little bit annoying, but I will say the scientific experiments that I have placed on this lander, the longest duration one is only 2 hours long, so I am going to be able to get all of the data in terms of gameplay that I can from this craft without worrying. So I will say this is a complete success. But as the sun sets on the Beagle lander, it's time to return back to the Space Center, where we are going to be spending an awful lot of money. I'm going to quickly pop into R&D though and pick up mature capsules for the multi-role capsule, as well as large Hydrolox engines, which contains the Volcane, the core engine for Ariane 5. And then, with 2 million funds to spend, it really is time to pour some upgrades into my build queue and research queue. Those Volcanes are not going to research themselves, and in order to catch up with the other two in this series, I really need to get a move on with things. Getting my 2 build queues to 3 build points a second and getting my research to nearly 1 science a day does seem to be quite a good start. However, I'm sure that I can push that even further. I mentioned earlier on that the Mars landing contract is slightly different, and it's the only one of these contracts that required a new vessel to be launched. And in my compelling argument over to Beardy and N9, who agreed with me here, I did say that the intent of this mission was always to land. But anyway, they agreed, so I went into the Alt F12 screen and I completed that contract. But can we take that further? I think we absolutely can. And today we are going to pick up first crewed lunar flyby and first crewed lunar orbit. And suddenly I am on 6.5 million funds. Well, I think we can say bankruptcy is a thing of the past. With the new funds, I unlock a 10,000 ton launch pad. This is going to be used for sending crew to the moon. I've picked up the contract now, I need to do it. And then I spend another 3.5 million on upgrade points. And in doing so, get myself to nearly 1.3 science a day, and both of my build queues up to 4 build points a second. And that means I can churn out rockets incredibly fast, as is the case with fish number 3, which we're going to be launching on the 11th of October 1967. Now, I have picked up a contract for this. This isn't just going to be a launch where I just have an extra communication satellite in orbit. No, we're going to go for first sun-synchronous orbit with this mission. Not really an exciting contract considering all that we've done over the course of this mission, but something that I wanted to complete regardless. When designing this vehicle though, my intent was to complete first Molniya orbit, but I don't really need Molniya orbits being in the southern hemisphere, and I'm not sure if the Black Duke 2, which is the launch vehicle that is currently in use for this mission, would be powerful enough to achieve that Molniya orbit. I didn't actually simulate this mission, so I've got no idea if that would be capable. It's gonna be touch and go whether it could complete Molniya, but I have absolute faith that this will complete sun synchronous. That doesn't actually require a huge amount of Delta V, and this vehicle has about 11,500 on the pad, which is almost enough to actually send this to the moon. But obviously we're not going to be doing that today. No, we want to send a satellite to orbit to constantly see the sun. That's what sun synchronous means. And realistically, we're going to complete the contract, hopefully, get all of the money for it, and then this will just be another communication satellite that I can rely upon. And because of that, when I do complete this contract, I'm not just going to finish there. I do want to put it into a slightly higher orbit than the contract parameters require, so that way the communications coverage of this satellite will be a little bit larger than if I left it in the original orbit that this contract desires. Anyway, now it's just to carry on with the burn to raise my eccentricity, because for this contract it needs to be between 0.02 and 0.04, and a circular orbit is not going to get me that. But there we go, we have now cut the burn for now, and the contract is complete, and I'm going to raise my orbit even higher and try and get a 1 million meter circular orbit. And pretty much that's it for this mission. We've got the money from the contract, and we now have another communications satellite in low Earth orbit. Although one thing that I will say about this is, unfortunately, the solar panel placement on this spacecraft wasn't the best. And unfortunately, that does mean that this satellite is going to die after only a few days. I did want to place some better folding solar panels on it, but unfortunately, I haven't unlocked those yet. I do, however, have another fish design with more solar panels, but we're going to have to wait until the next episode before we see that.